modern people are fundamentally materialistic. And there's some utility in that. We're masters of material transformation. And the fact that we're materialist in our scientific philosophies has made us extremely powerful, maybe too powerful for our morality, extremely powerful from a technological perspective, but it's blinded us to certain things. And I think one of the things that it's really blinded us to is the nature of our own being. Because we make the assumption that the fundamental constituent elements of reality are material, we fail to notice that the fundamental constituent elements of our own reality are not material. They're emotional, they're motivational, they're dreams, they're visions, they're relationships with other people. They're conscious, they're dependent on consciousness and self-consciousness. And we have absolutely no materialist explanation whatsoever, either for consciousness or self-consciousness. And we don't deal well from a materialistic perspective with the qualities of being. And everyone knows those qualities exist. I mean, for most people, there's nothing more real than their own pain. Right? Pain transcends rational argument in that you can't argue yourself out of it. It's just there. And materialist or not, there's very few people that are willing to allow the claim that their pain is merely an epiphenomenon of some more fundamental material process. Pain is fundamental, consciousness is fundamental. And I think that unless you understand that, you can't think properly about virtue. So I might start the discussion of virtue with the discussion of being. Well, what does human being look like? Well, the Buddhists say life is suffering. That's the first fundamental Buddhist dictum. And I suppose a modern person would tend to think of that as a very pessimistic claim. But I've found when I've shared that information with my students, once they understand what it means, it's actually a relief, because people run around madly suffering away, and all of them inside their little shell think, well, there must be something wrong with me, because here I am suffering, and you know, I mean, that isn't how things are supposed to be. Well, then you might say, who says that's not the way things are supposed to be? The Buddhists say life is suffering. So that what that means is if you're not suffering, that's a good thing, that's lucky, that's fortunate. That's not the way of the world. That may be something to be grateful for, ecstatic about even. And of course, in Christianity, the central symbol of Christianity is a crucifix, which is not a positive symbol in any way. It's a symbol of betrayal by friends, opposition from the state, and mortal vulnerability. It's about as powerful a symbolic representation of the idea that life is suffering as you can put together, which is of course why the power of that symbol extends across several thousand years. Judaism, well, I don't think it's going to come as a shock to anybody in the audience that Jews are acutely aware of the suffering that's involved in life. So it's useful to know, to understand what it means that life is suffering. It's a fundamental ontological truth. It's a fundamental statement about the nature of being. And there's a reason for that. It's not incomprehensible. It's perfectly comprehensible. We're finite, right? We have a lifespan that's bounded temporally. You're going to live maybe 100 years, and that'll pretty much be it. And then there's other forms of extreme limitation that are imposed on you that have very little to do with you. They're arbitrary facts of being. You're a certain height, you're a certain weight, you're a certain amount of attractive, you're a certain amount of intelligent, you're a certain amount of athletic, you're a certain amount of mentally ill, you're a certain amount of predisposition to cancer. And it's frequently the case that people like to attribute those vulnerabilities to some flaw in their own nature, but what they are instead are conditions of existence. Human being is predicated on a kind of fundamental limitation in that we are what we are and we're not other things. And so that means inevitably that the awareness of human being comes along with suffering. And life poses the question, how to conduct yourself in the face of suffering, not only yours, but everyone else's. And it's an inescapable question, except that maybe you're fortunate and you'll have periods of time where something absolutely horrible isn't happening to you. Now, you think about this, because you might think this is pessimistic, but it's not pessimistic. It's actually one of the most freeing things that you can realize. Maybe there's nothing particularly wrong with you at the moment, but there's a high probability that you have a family member that has something seriously wrong with them. And there's a very high probability that if you don't, you will soon. Or maybe you'll have a partner that has something serious wrong with them. And to know this frees you from the false illusion that life can be conducted without suffering. Suffering's an integral part of being.